Our first speaker today is Megan Pleasanton. She is an extension educator with Delaware State University Cooperative Extension, and she will be talking with us about the IPM of feeding the birds. Thanks so much, Megan.
All right, thanks for having me. So this is my second time on your IPM First Friday. I am from Delaware State University. I am in the Small Farms program as well as the coordinator of the Master Gardener program in Kent and Sussex counties here in Delaware. All right, so feeding the birds, we're just going to jump right into it. I do want to say that DSU has a non-discrimination policy, and I wanted to share that as my second slide here so that everyone knows that we are, open to all. So wild birds, how can they help us in our farms and gardens? So just a few, obvious things. They eat beetles, caterpillars, grasshoppers, grubs, moths, stink bugs, snails, slugs. They also can help with your moles, your voles, your gophers, mice, and rabbits in your small home gardens and backyard habitats. So how birds eat, I think that's important to kind of talk about, what, ways do birds actually eat. So you've got your ground foragers that take items, um, from the ground. Obviously, those are things like, oh, I forget now, but anyway, so you've also got some stalking. So they ambush or they slowly pursue their prey. Foliage gleaners, which select food from the leaves and the middle and the lower canopy of your forest areas. Your bark foragers, which drill holes or scales off of bark, like your woodpeckers. Hovering, they hover in the air while they're eating their prey. The birds that are kind of like, after you see a field being worked, kind of, taking advantage of some of the insects that are flying up there. Fly catching, so they perch on an exposed branch, waiting for insects to fly by and then pursue the insects in the air. You also have your regular air foragers for the flies that, they capture the flies as they're in the air or above the ground. Your aerial divers, which they dive for the prey that's actually on the ground, and then soaring, so they glide while scanning for their prey. So diets of some wild birds. So you've got your insectivores, which consume mostly insects, occasionally eating some seeds, fruits, or leaves. Your carnivores, like this owl here, I thought that was a beautiful picture. They eat small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and some other small birds. You've got your nectivores that consume nectar, something like your hummingbird. Omnivores, which consume both plants and animals, including some fruits and nuts, and also insects as well. And then your granivores, which are just seed eaters. So the ones that are actually a problem in your garden would be, your omnivores and your granivores. They can switch from being, beneficial to being, actual pest in your garden. So for the habitat, birds are more likely to eat insects that are near their habitat. So if you've got a garden that's on, the edge of a woodline area, you're more likely to have some birds that are able to be beneficials for your garden or your, your backyard farm. So, or if you need to add a habitat, maybe putting in a little row of trees, some natives that could help bring those birds and keep those birds there. So they've got a place to live and then also consume the insects that are in your garden that are giving you problems. So like I said, planting native trees, they really do help keep some of those native birds around and just, that's what they're used to. So that's what they prefer. And then forest buffers, around the different field areas, hedgerows. Also, some of these habitats could provide a windbreak for your garden or your backyard farm as well. So when to feed the birds? So, some people do feed the birds year round to kind of keep them there, but late winter and early spring or during really extreme temperatures in the winter, that's when you'd like to add in your different varieties of feeders to help bring the birds to your garden to help mitigate your pest. So feeder placement is something that's really important and a lot of people don't think about it. So ground feeders, they're or table feeders, they sometimes are called, are good for sparrows and different kind of birds that tend to be, low feeding birds that come in. Your shrub feeders, so it's something like this to the right, the tube feeders, it's like kind of at a shrub level where the birds kind of like to hang out, and it's where they're searching for their next meal. Or tree feeders, where you can include some suet for birds like chickadees and woodpeckers and things. You can kind of hang those up higher in a tree. Oops. And then water sources. So water sources are something that we have to think about in your home garden. Whether you've got a pond nearby in the back of your farm, or you've got a regular bird bath, or something that's constantly kind of running that the birds can drink out of. Having a water source to keep those birds comfortable is really important as well. So sanitation of waters and feeders are really important. So you want to use a cleaning solution, about 10% bleach for your water sources, and keep them clean. And then also changing your water out. If you change the water out, every 3 days is usually recommended. Also to move your feeders. If you've got some table or some low feeders, you want to make sure you kind of move them around the area, and then make sure you clean underneath them. So that's where you can kind of get some different problems with mice, or rats, even if you're letting the feed just kind of the hulls of whatever seed you're feeding fall down, and then you're not picking it up. It can bring in some things that you don't want, as well as a smell. It can kind of get unsanitary. And then again, just changing your water every 3 days is just really good practice for the health of the wild birds that come in. And then here's just a photo of example of some ways that you can clean your tube feeders as well as your waterers. So what to feed your wild birds? So, wild birds are going to eat a variety of nuts, seeds, mealworms, fruit, suet, and cracked corn. One thing about suet is they typically recommend to not feed it in the summertime. That's something that you're going to want to bring in for those added fats in the wintertime. And in the summer, it can also get a little bit kind of it's just not as pleasant to have suet feeders in the summertime. And then I found this really great list of some different birds from North America. I think this was from Penn State. I have the actual site and the references to come up, but just kind of says what the top kind of 10 or 15 of birds are and what they like to eat. So you've got the American goldfinch, and they recommend hulled sunflower seeds, Niger seeds, and oil type sunflower seeds. Blue jays prefer peanut kernels, black stripe, gray stripe, and oil type sunflower seeds. Brown-headed cowbirds like white proso or red proso, German millet, and canary seed. Cardinals, sunflower seeds of all types. I guess they're not picky. Chickadees, oil type, and black striped sunflower seeds and peanut kernels. Dark-eyed junco, red proso, millet, canary seed, fine cracked corn. House finch. So this talked about in Maryland, oil type and black striped sunflower seeds, sunflower kernels and pieces. In California, white millet and flaxen. House sparrow kind of goes on to purple finches, starlings, the song sparrow, tuft titmouse. This is just really nice to see, the different kind of seeds that some of the birds do prefer. So then birds of prey. So some different birds of prey that could help mitigate some of the problems in your backyard garden would be, hawks, owls, eagles, and falcons, specifically for, rodent control. Rodents can really pose a big issue when it comes to irrigation, chewing some holes in drip lines, and just, the sanitation of having mice and rats in your gardeners is just not ideal. So kind of encouraging these types of birds to be around your garden is just a great way to kind of mitigate some of those rodent problems that you might have. Or rabbits. I mean, think about, how much damage rabbits could do in a relatively short period of time. And then here's just some tips on how you can protect your crops from those birds that you're bringing in. So, with all of the good that they bring in, they also can pose a problem, such as the sanitation in your garden, and actually eating what you're trying to grow, your blueberries and your different fruits and nuts that you're growing. So bagging and netting is really an effective way that a lot of vineyards use to protect their grapes. Different sounds can be displayed, kind of sounds of animals that are hunting the birds. Reflective tape can be a deterrent. There's some natural repellents, and then of course, lastly would be your chemical repellents. So bagging is definitely something that we do here at Del State on our farm with our strawberries. We have a pretty good sized strawberry um, demonstration plot, and we use a lot of netting and just to protect our crops, especially if we're doing yield analysis and things like that. So these are just two examples of netting your strawberries or your blueberries. So some additional problems I was talking about with your birds on your property would be, of course, that contamination prevention. You've got birds, and then they defecate on your crops. Then you've got some risks there, especially like in the news we saw about the spinach not that long ago that from contamination from birds. Also, migrating birds can bring in the avian influenza, which is something that we definitely in Delaware. We've got a high amount of broiler production here, and just we're always on the look for the the avian influenza and how to mitigate some of those some of those dangers. Eating crops, and then they can also consume some of the beneficial insects in your garden. That's something yes, they're eating some of those damaging pests, but they could also consume some of the beneficials that you want to bring in, for pollination and whatnot. I was actually I had our poultry specialist in here with me, and I was working on this PowerPoint the other day, and he said, "What about weeder geese?" And I had never thought about utilizing weeder geese, but it made me kind of go down a rabbit hole and look into that about integrating geese into your property. You have to manage it in the correct way. You have to kind of protect what you don't want them to eat, and keep them on like a rotation, but they can really be beneficial to help weed your garden. So they're getting those insects, and they're also weeding your pathways, weeding around maybe some in an orchard area where you're not wanting to use a weed eater or chemicals around your trees. They could just really be a nice way to help reduce some of your herbicide use, reduce soil compaction, without having to till down your aisles. You bring in some geese, and they're also providing some natural fertilizer while they're out there. It's definitely a tool that you have to manage in the correct way. But then some cons would be, they're noisy. Geese do make a lot of noise. And you have to be super careful about, monitoring them and making sure that they're healthy. And then fencing issues, keeping them kind of constrained in the area that you want them in. And something else I read about them is that they have to kind of be trained. So the young geese that you bring in, they have to kind of be trained to eat that forage in that correct way. So if they're, a goose that you just buy that's full grown from an auction or something, they're going to be more selective about the types of grass and weeds that they're consuming. Where if you kind of start them young, you teach them that they're eating, what's there. Some of the older mature weeds and things like that, they kind of are getting trained. So that was really a neat tool I thought about. So here's some tips for caring for the birds in the winter, providing large feeders, different seed combinations to bring in a variety and a diversity of seeds or birds into your garden, offering some fatty food in the winter, keeping your feeders full, making sure that you're monitoring them. And if they get wet, you take out some of the seed that's no longer good. Be consistent with feeding. You don't want to start and then halfway through January, you say, "Oh, it's too cold out there. I don't feel like feeding the birds," but that's really when they become dependent on it. Remembering that they do need water, a water source. So there were some people talking about, using heaters in your garden, in your bird waterer. Also, you can stamp down the snow. If you get a lot of snow where you're at, you can stamp it down, and then some of those ground feeding birds are not having to search through the snow so much. It kind of falls on top. Cat safe locations. Remember that cats do like to eat birds, and if you can try to keep a variety of cedars and safe from your cats and squirrels, everybody that feeds birds also know how squirrels can be a pesky problem as well. And then keeping your feeders clean and stocking up on seed, in the beginning of the year to stock up. But remember, when you're storing bird seed, you want to keep it in a safe place where moisture and mice can't get to it. And that's all I have. So, and then I have my resources there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There are some questions in the chat, and the first one is, are there downsides to the birds relying on the bird feeder? So are there times and locations where you don't want to feed the birds because it could be harmful to them?
Um, I mean, I think they definitely get dependent. That's definitely something, that's why the maintaining the consistency of putting your bird seed out is so important. Um, Not that I really know of any other, but once you start, you really need to continue with that.
Great. Another quick question. When you mentioned peanut kernels, are peanut
Mhm.
kernels the same as regular peanuts, or is that something different?
So I would just recommend when you're buying your bird seed to go to your local, local place. I don't want to say any name brands, but you want to stick to places that are actually selling them for bird seed. You wouldn't want to get like salted peanuts or anything like that, but it is the same, but I would just definitely stick with the actual bird mix.
Okay. This is a really good question. Someone was wondering whether the highly pathogenic avian influenza is also transmitted by migratory songbirds, or are we mostly concerned about ducks and geese for its transmission? Do you know the answer to that
So
question?
I believe that it's both. When I had the specialist in here, he was, that was one thing he said, that just to keep try to keep as sanitary as possible when you're bringing them in. If you've got a backyard flock, he actually recommended to not feed the wild birds, just because you don't want to add that extra risk, if you've got a backyard flock. So, but yes, migratory birds can potentially carry the avian influenza.
Okay, thank you. And I see that someone also added a USDA APHIS link. So folks are wanting to learn more. I'm sure there's more information there. Oh, do you have any tips for discouraging birds from nesting in an awning that is rolled up most of the winter?
Oh man. Yes, I mean, I guess you could potentially. I would just try to seal it up as good as you can. If you've got a habitual offender, it's going to be really hard to deter them. But just yeah, trying to not make it as comfortable as they want it to be.
Great. I am seeing a couple comments in the chat. If you live somewhere where there are bears, to be mindful that feeders can be attractive to bears, and some folks bring them in at night. Or I know around here in New York, they recommend certain months of the year that you take your feeders in, because they can be food for bears. I think in the summer, usually they say that.
I have zero experience with bears. We do not have them in Delaware.
All right. Well, thank you for that great information. I think we've gotten through all the questions in the chat. And we have, Joellen has updated us, stop feeding the birds on April 1st that's the recommendation in New York State for bear avoidance. All right, we're going to transition over to our IPM minute. And I am going to actually share the slides for this, so bear with us. We're going to do some tricky IT stuff here. Dr. Elizabeth Lamb is our greenhouse and ornamentalist coordinator at New York State Integrated Pest Management, and talking to us about how to repurpose your holiday tree in an IPM friendly way. So go ahead, Betsy.
Thanks, Samara. So one of the first things you can do if you're going, and this is sort of a joke, but not entirely, is you keep your tree. And so this is a tree that's been decorated for Valentine's Day. But if you're going to keep it longer, and actually no matter how long you keep a Christmas tree, you must water it. They drink a lot of water, especially when you bring them in, especially because it's been a fairly dry year this year. And so they will drink a lot of water. So make sure you water them. And that picture is of a reservoir for a tree stand that is way too small. You need it to be at least a gallon, just to throw that out there. And also, we're talking about real trees, not what to do with an old artificial tree in this case. So the next thing, which goes along perfectly with the previous talk, is to put it outside for bird shelter. And often you could just throw it on its side, or stand it up, sometimes stand it up near some other trees, or even put it close to your bird feeder. You can also add bird food on it. This tree is pretty elaborate. I don't know that I would leave the ribbon on it, but things that will biodegrade or will be eaten is a good idea. Another thing you can do is cut off some of the branches and use them as ground cover. And so in this case, they're protecting a little conifer. You can almost see it in there. And it's an easy way to do, it sort of helps accumulate snow around the plant, which protects it, but also protects the ground from frost heaving. But something to think about if you're using the conifer branches as mulch is that the needles will acidify the soil. Now, you're not putting a ton of needles necessarily on, but just to keep that in mind of what the plants are that you're putting them around, because you can specifically use the needles or the branches to acidify the soil around acid-loving plants like blueberries or rhododendrons. I meant to put a little picture of a broom in a dustpan, because hopefully your tree is not shedding and losing its needles, but if it starts to do them, you're sweeping them up, you might as well put them somewhere they can be used. I have heard people talking about using them for potpourri. There you go. There's another use for the things that fall off your tree. One of the really good things to do with it is to mulch it. Now you need to check with your locality on whether or not they collect trees and mulch them, and then how you would get the mulch back. Not too many people have their own ability to mulch trees, but it's good mulch to use in a variety of places on your garden. And so that's a nice thing to do with it in terms of keeping it out of the waste stream. And again, you need to think about what you're mulching and when you're mulching it, but conifer mulch is a nice mulch. I like this one. I found this one when I was looking, and apparently it's Windsor, Colorado. They have a magical forest where they use the trees that they collect after Christmas, and they make a playground. So there's an option. And so just first enjoy it as much as you can and have a happy holiday. Any questions? That was quick.
That was quick. Thank you, Betsy.
Oh, somebody's talking about feeding them to goats, and I've heard that goats love them. Love conifer branches. I have a friend who has goats, and she asked for them one year. Yeah, yes, and someone's saying that they can use them at the beach, and so they do it in some places for ponds. Also, they'll collect trees and throw them into ponds to create habitat. Let's see, I can't read the rest of it. Oh, and use it.
Question for you, Betsy.
Yep.
Do I need to make sure I take 100% of the tinsel off of my tree before I put it outside?
It's plastic, and yes, it would be nice to say yes, but it's an almost impossible task at times. So like anything, we're always hoping that you do the best you can do. And other things too. And you might want to find a different way to make your tree sparkle instead of using tinsel, just in general.
Yeah, I think I would probably rather skip the tinsel than stand there and try to pull off every strand of tinsel.
Yeah. Burning it in the fireplace, you want it to dry out first. And then also, yeah, somebody said really bad idea. They're pretty sappy, and so my other thought that I was thinking was in terms of creosote. For some reason, yeah, creosote. Yep, there's a little sign that's overlapping my the information. Okay, I don't use it on a live Christmas tree, but my neighbors love to donate theirs for the benefit of my birds. So that's nice. It gives them a great cover to hide from hawks, and I can also hang extra suet from it. There you go. Perfect. Because of health issues last year, my mom kept delaying putting away her real Christmas tree, and then June came. So she decided to keep everything the way it was. And this year, the same tree is up there and looking great. It's a Christmas miracle. Hopefully she's been watering it well. But I will tell you that I actually had one flower. I was trying to figure out, and if you don't know what conifer flowers look like, I had male flowers and I had pollen. I was trying to figure out what all this yellow powder was. And I didn't keep it till June or beyond. So make sure that it's not too dry. That's the biggest issue, because dry trees are dangerous in your house. Especially, you must have it in a good location so that it's not drying out too much. Oh, metal icicles. Yeah, I've seen those too, where you can get metal. So they're kind of long metal icicles that you just hang on in place of tinsel. We got great ideas out there
We do.
in Zoom land.
We have come to the end of our half hour of What's Bugging You First Friday. So I want to thank our speakers today, Megan and Betsy, for sharing some great information. To everyone who joined us, thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions and attention, and also your input and ideas. And have a great holiday season, everyone.